about. Great. So this is our website. Hopefully you've all had a chance to have a look at it. This is the opening page, which talks about a bit more about what Out of the Blocks is, and those principles I've just covered. How you can join, which you all have done because you're on the webinar tonight. The support networks we're looking to create, the education and resources. So the plan is to hopefully get all these webinars recorded and loaded up onto the website so you can look at them. And we're also going to be making them some specific resources for new consultants to be able to access. I'll talk in a minute just about the committee that we've set up. And if you do need to contact us, obviously you've all got emails. Most of you have our emails, but if you did want to contact us through the website, you can. We really couldn't be out with this position where we've gone from coming up with this idea and then creating it without the committee that's really helped behind it. So we've got Jim Kress, who's helpful in his really main role is focusing on connecting you more with the faculty. Sonia Baines, who's involved in the support networks and is leading on the WhatsApp group and mentoring. And then Alethea and Dane, who are focusing mostly on education, but we've all worked together. And the faculty have also been hugely supportive of this, with Yvonne and Siobhan giving a lot of their time to this, and Ian Williamson as well, helping with the website design. So really grateful for those people. And this is all about you guys as a group, and hopefully we can, the more we contribute, the more we put in, the more we're going to hopefully get out of this and be able to support each other. So before we move on to introducing the first talk, I'd just like to say that the next webinar, to put your dates in the diary, is the 2nd of March, which this is going to be focusing on private practice and appraisal. Again, if you have ideas about webinars that'd be helpful, please communicate that with us, with topics that you want us to cover. We're more than happy to do that for you. To be able to get your certificate from the faculty, we just need you to fill out a feedback link, which Dane will be putting in the chat, which we can, you then fill out the feedback, which is a quick form, and then we'll send you your certificate from tonight's webinar. So I'm going to hand over to Dane to introduce Rod.
Thanks, Ralph. So before I introduce Rod, who probably doesn't need many introductions from most of us, I think when we started looking at this, we were looking at what do we need to learn as new consultants, and I guess clinical governance in sport came up a lot, because it's something we're all asked to do when we work in sport roles particularly, and it's where we're not in an NHS that's already set up. So in that case, we're looking at what needs to be in place, how does it need to work, and what are all the challenges coming out. And obviously there's been a lot of issues in the media, and obviously Rod is the perfect person to do this talk. So I'm delighted to have Rod Jakes join us. So as you said, he doesn't need an introduction, but I'll give you one anyway. And he has many roles, but he's the Director of Medical Services at EIS. He's a past president of the faculty. He authored the professional code for FSEM, and a recent Delphi, which I've read, has been contributed and written by Rod, which was on the international syllabus. I don't know if any of you guys have seen it. I think part 2 just came out. And finally, the more important thing here is that he's also provided the independent review for British cycling, which many of us will have read about as well. So I think all of those things make Rod the most credible person here to give that talk on governance. And hopefully, if you keep posting questions in the chat, I think it's a good one for us to kind of push back critical questions where we can kind of get some feedback, particularly about things we might also do on our own organisations and clubs. So Rod, over to you, which means I need to share your screen, don't I?
Thank you very much indeed, and good evening, everybody. I hope you're all well, and what a wonderful initiative this is. I wish I had it 30 odd years ago, and I really hope it's useful to you. So this is a rather stunning headline from the Sunday Times in 2004, that society is only 4 meals away from anarchy. And that actually is one of the strap lines, apparently, if you can get into MI5, that you'll see. Next slide, please, Dane. And I think actually elite sport and working in elite sport is almost similar. It's actually a very small, short, slippery slope before things go very badly wrong. So I'd like to talk to you about the sort of governance considerations in elite sport from what I've learned over the last 30 years. Thank you. Next slide. This character may be known to you. If you could just click a few times. First of all, we're under increasing professional and public scrutiny, and you can just see that in the papers all the time, whether it be concussion, abuse in sport, bullying, eating disorders, or indeed cheating. It's becoming now a common topic. Next, thank you. Certainly of particular issue was British cycling, Taekwondo, British athletics, and Team Sky, who were hauled through the coals sequentially over the last 2.5 years. Thank you. It's certainly clear to me that actually, if you work in a well-regulated, peer-reviewed organization, you as an individual are less likely to make professional errors of judgment. And however, it's working in that well-regulated, peer-reviewed organization, which is not necessarily compatible with elite sport or professional sport. Thank you. And certainly it's expected by members of the public that you will act with professional autonomy. And of course, Larry Nassar, next slide, thank you. It was the most obvious case. And you know, what was ironic was that even during his court hearing, his local school supported him to become a member of the Board of Governors. So it's rather bizarre that society can, with one hand, take someone like this and quite justifiably imprison him, but on the other hand, accept him for the professional that he is and put him on their Board of Governors. Next slide, please. The whole elite performance system was subject to a House of Commons Select Committee. And the findings came out in February 2018. And the underlying theme of those findings was that we should, as an entire professional sporting system, act with tighter governance. And these were quotes directly from the sort of summary chapter. There were acute failures in several different organizations. There was a failure to share medical records with anti-doping organizations. There was a failure to keep proper internal records of substances given to athletes. And some steps had been taken, but they had come too late. And it was very clear to the high performance system and to professional sport in general. And this was the closing remark of the House of Commons Select Committee report, that we call on these bodies identified in this report to pay serious attention to our recommendations. We cannot afford to allow these failures to happen again. And I think that was a shot across the bows to the entire system, that the tolerance from the Department of Culture, Media and Sport and from the House of Commons is wafer thin now for any poor behavior. Thank you. And it's a very lonely place, actually, as a doctor, when you are in this sort of predicament. It really feels like you are head up against a brick wall, and it's really difficult to know how to navigate your way out of it. Next slide, please. And of course, that big culture issue has huge overlaps with mental and indeed physical health of athletes. We certainly see a higher injury rate in the Olympic and Paralympic system in sports who have less than desirable cultures. And the standards that we maintain, both professional and in our daily conduct, absolutely overlap in this area. Next slide, please. So with the outcome of the House of Commons Select Committee, I went back to UK Sport and said, look, I think we really need to look at our system with some degree of rigor. And I set up what I'll explain to you in a moment is a good medical governance template. And I asked the chief medical officers and the heads of performance services of each of our Olympic and Paralympic sports to fill this out. And I targeted 11 sports during the course of 2019, and I visited them after they had reflected on that template. And this was a 4-hour meeting that took place. And as it were, on my side of the panel was the Director of Medical Services of the English Institute, a senior external sport and exercise medicine consultant, and a sport and exercise medicine witness. And on the sports side was the Chief Medical Officer, the Head of Performance Services, any other head of medical services that existed, plus usually the Performance Director and the Head of Science. Next slide, please. And the outcome from that was a summary document that I then agreed with the sport with some caveats. And then a timeline of actions, and I reported that back to UK Sport, and I reported that back to the national governing body doctor, the chief executive officer, and the performance director. So it was an utterly transparent process whereby I could really pretty well say what I wanted to about what I thought their system was. And so what are the details of that system? Next slide, please. I'm sorry, this is a really busy slide, but I'm going to break it up a little bit for you. But I just want you to concentrate on the left-hand column, please. What you see there is essentially doctor, clinical environment, medical record keeping, injury and illness auditing, and how they handled bloods and blood profiling, how they handled the requests for novel treatments, their therapeutic use and anti-doping processes, how they handled complementary therapists, what the nature of their cardiac screening was and their mental health screening program, what their safeguarding actions were, what their preparations were around emergency care, and their medical deselection at training or in competitions. And their final aspect was confidentiality. And those are the main headlines and frames of the discussion that we had. And I'm just going to tease out for you some of the subsections of that in some detail. Next slide, please. As far as the doctor's concerned, we were really looking to make certain that these were sport and exercise medicine consultants. They'd been through the appropriate revalidation and their insurance was appropriate to what they were doing, and that they understood exactly what they were getting into. And in terms of the clinical environment, we wanted to make certain that these are environments which were CQC registered and that, for instance, equipment was regularly serviced. Next slide. In terms of medical records and blood testing, the particular issues here that I'll talk about later was issues of security and the dispensing of medicines and the destructions of those medicines and auditing of the medicines cupboards in these institutions. And in terms of injury and illness audit, it's good practice to understand what your most prevalent injuries and illnesses are and what you're doing about them. There's whole MDT buy-in to this. Next slide, please. Around novel treatments, which is really where the department, the House of Commons Select Committee were particularly interested in. We wanted a robust review process, clearly written out about how novel treatments were proposed, analyzed, and if they were instigated, how they audited their outcomes. And the same with complementary therapists. And of course, the same with cardiac screening. I mean, the most expensive payout that there has been in sport and exercise medicine so far has been a flaw in the cardiac screening, not the diagnosis end, but how the results were handled back at the sports club where it came from. Next slide, please. And then finally, big issues around mental health, which of course has been of particular interest to the public over the last 3 or 4 years. How safeguarding is handled in sport. Did the sports regularly run scenario rehearsals around emergency issues? And at the testing times of world championships and the European championships, how could you deselect an athlete on medical grounds? Those sorts of issues were some of the subsets of the things that we really wanted policies and procedures around. Thank you. Next slide. So what were the key observations that we made here from those 11 sports? First of all, it's really difficult to do good medicine in poor culture. And what I found was that actually paradoxically, sports which have recurrent successes became siloed, particularly over 3 Olympic cycles, where there was a single-handed doctor. Actually, good medical governance suffered. So that was paradoxical. Repeated success seemed to endorse poor behavior. And so you've got this dichotomy of the tug between good medicine and performance. And this is part of the most difficult thing that you'll find that when you join a professional sporting club or Olympic or Paralympic sport, these two issues, how to balance this equation. Next slide, please. So what were the common areas of poor governance across those 11 sports that I looked at? Very few of them had a sort of review panel for novel treatments. And that was the big impact that we made. Second of all, very few of them had a formalized way of reporting adverse events, any untoward event that might have done harm. Some of them didn't have sufficiently robust cardiac screening management processes, not how the person got screened, but what happened to the result afterwards and who had ownership of that. And some of them actually, their medical treatment areas were simply just not up to scratch. Next slide, please. What about system issues? Well, CQC was not involved in some of those sports medical treatment areas, and that became a compulsory requirement from our point of view. And that the complementary practitioners that some of those sports used, were not adhering to good medical practice about medical record keeping, referral back to the person who referred to them, and integrating their notes and integrating their thinking with the rest of the MDT. And even basic things like equipment servicing was not done on an annualized basis. Next, please. And the professional issues was that some sports weren't doing dress rehearsals for emergency scenarios, and they weren't running regular medical audits, record audits. Next slide, please. Now, if we reflect back to what goes on in the NHS and the principles that are applied there through the sort of National Guardian freedom to speak up process, well, the first thing here is that the senior leadership support is required for speaking up. So unless you've got the senior leadership team of that sport and the performance director and the senior coach underpinning this process, it's really difficult for the doctor to work appropriately. So, and this was a big message back to myself and to UK sport. Second of all, that speaking up against this process was actually not critical. This was actually part of an improvement activity. And this is a really important thing to stress. This is actually patient safety and improvement, and actually probably enhancing people's performances in elite sport. And actually you need effective training to speak up. And people, in order to get the person to speak up, it's often said in the NHS that if a person on two occasions tries to speak up, but their voice is not heard, they will often not speak up again. So I think that's really important to stress inside a system. And the final point here is easy to use channels to speak up, and several channels to speak up, not just to your line manager, but for someone who you can go to independently or through another UK sport system. Thank you. Next slide, please. Of course, I hope you've come across these documents, your good medical practice from the GMC, the Faculty Professional Code, and in the English Institute, in collaboration with the Scottish, Welsh and Northern Ireland Institute, we drew up our own professional code. And the reason for that, I'll come to in a moment, because we felt that we had to write down what we expected of all members of the multidisciplinary team, both in medicine and in science. Next slide, please. So I'm going to close in the next one or two slides. What would I suggest you do if you're about to take on the mantle of a CMO post in a sport? What would be your checklist? Can I just click away for me, Dan, please? First of all, look at your contract. Who are your lines of reporting? Do you truly get a sense from that and from the predecessor that you have professional autonomy? A couple more clicks, please. What do the facilities look like? Because once you're in those facilities, it's jolly difficult to change them. So the time to change them is before you sign the contract. Identify who your patient population is. What are your out of hours expectations? Are they going to phone you 24/7? And is it expected that you'd extend your role into the coaches and the coaches' families? And that certainly does happen in some professional sports. And are there adequate medical record keeping facilities? And before you sign on the dotted line, get these things nailed out as to what their responsibilities are. And ask the sport, what is your whistleblowing safeguarding procedure? Who is your safeguarding officer? Next slide, please. So what do I think the challenge is for us all here? First of all, if you do sign a contract, and as it were, you are 50%, 80% owned by that sport, how much control do you feel you have? And it's a bit like the Michael Jackson doctor syndrome. If Michael wants more stronger sleeping tablet, then Michael gets it because that's the only person that that doctor's looking after. So in a sense, you have a vulnerability as being largely employed by that sport of sort of doing their will. And that's why this sort of group and professional codes are really important to you. Second of all, inside your multidisciplinary teams, you will have variable regulatory bodies. And in some disciplines like strength and conditioning, no regulatory body whatsoever. The third aspect is that the more you win, the more you feel part of the system. But actually, there is this historical issue that is very strong, that sequentially winning sports tend to drift. So beware that. The fourth thing here is that actually athletes are not their own best friends, and they have a huge short-termism about how they think about their middle and long-term future. And in a sense, you have to act as grandfather or grandmother to them, to really advise them and to write down the advice that you gave to them if you feel that they're making the wrong decision. And of course, and the fifth point here is that you are relatively isolated. So it's really important to create linkages with other similar sports. And the final thing is that there's a real threat to you that you actually go native in this sport. You get so sucked in to the whole system, you become so much part of this organization that actually you can lose perspective. And recognizing and having the insight before you go native is really important. Next slide, please. So I'm going to close on that point, if I may, and welcome any questions. I hope I've opened up some areas for you that you'd like to think about, and some areas that you probably have already thought about, but I'm very happy to take any questions.
Guys, are there any particular questions? I popped one in the chat. I just wonder if there were any others.
You want to start with your one, Dane?
Yeah. So I guess a question for me, Rob, will be around CQC. So when because we set up CQC for our clinic, and then we looked at, do we do it for our sports club? And when I asked them at the time, this is 2 years ago, they considered a sports club to be occupational health. And they said the only reason we would need official CQC registration would be if we were seeing external patients inside the club facilities. I wondered if anything had changed on that front.
Yeah, actually, one ends up educating CQC an awful lot, or at least your local CQC officer an awful lot about what we do in a sport and exercise medicine clinic, particularly if it's sort of a professional sport-based environment. It is certainly, and I think the categories are, there are two categories that we fall under, which justifies us being a CQC registered location. One is a diagnostic center. So if you do ultrasound there, you are a diagnostic center. And the second is intervention. So if you do injections on site, then you are an intervention center. And I think it's from the CQC's perspective, what they are trying to they may well picture you as being sort of the medical officer to Stroud third 15 rugby team, and you sort of you work partly in the men's changing room, whereas actually you're in a much more robust environment than that, I suspect. And actually they need to understand that you have a clinic, that you are doing ultrasound, that you may well be doing injections on site, and actually I would urge you to go through the CQC process. So if you sense that actually they don't want to know about it, I would try and persuade them that you should be CQC registered, because that gives you as a professional a lot of protection. For instance, if you had a post-injection infection and you weren't CQC registered, then it's going to be a field day for the prosecuting lawyer. So I think you need to think carefully about that.
Okay, thanks. No, that's really useful. I think that's something that I definitely haven't done in any of my clubs to date when asked, so probably something I need to go back on. Cool. Any other questions? I think Dan's got his hand up.
Hi, Rod, and everyone else. I had a question about us as junior consultants and practitioners. So someone such as yourself, Mike and Natasha, who are experienced and established, carry a bit more gravitas than us, junior, younger people. Have you got any tips and hints about people who are relatively newly qualified and less experienced and established coming in and putting these difficult questions to the board and the management group of these sports and places? Because I found that a little bit tricky, because I kind of have to find my feet first, and it can be a bit tricky to ask these difficult questions and almost implicitly criticize what they've been doing up until then.
Well, boards of organizations are essentially risk mitigation committees. And you are part of the risk mitigation process. And I think there should be a sort of standing item, if you can, on the board about the medical risk mitigation that body is undertaking, and you should be presenting on that behalf. And if they are not doing that, Dan, it's because, again, a bit like CQC, they are ignorant of the issues that I've just discussed. So I think as soon as possible, when you join an organization, you need to have a serious chat about the list of that slide that I gave you, which started at the appointment of the doctor and his or her qualifications, and ended at safeguarding. You need to explain that to the board about what the breadth of responsibility that you bring. And I think that gives you an opener to report to the board. It's really difficult if you cannot report to the board, because your voice gets lost. So I would make that a requirement of your contract, that you have a right to report to the board.
Mike, I don't know if you've got your hand up, if you wanted to respond to that as well.
Yeah, so Dan, thanks very much for politely saying that Natasha and I are old. It's a very nicely way of putting it. And I think I've just shown my age by the fact that you managed to electronically put up your hand, whereas I just had to raise it. I think there are 2 points to your question, though. I think new is not bad. When you're new and you're coming in and you ask these questions, I think a club or an organisation would be foolish to turn them away, ignore you, because the older people are unfortunately slightly more laid back about all these things and just do things for a quiet life. And you need to be a bit more proactive. You're the young blood, the new fire. And I certainly don't think you should have a problem asking any of the questions that Rod has raised. And the other point, which I think is probably the most important point, and one that I don't think enough people do, is when is it right that you just walk away? That you either don't accept the job in the first place, or the job is so unacceptable when you started working in it that you just say, look, I just don't want to do this anymore because I've been unable to change it. Just because you are the CMO for whichever club, team, your dream team, the dream job, you need to be brave enough to throw in the towel and walk off. And I know, as I'm sure a lot of people do, there are several people that have done that in several high-profile jobs because they've been unable to change it, and that does raise alarm bells for people coming in. So don't be suckered into, once you've got the job, that you have to do it and you have to bend. And as Rod says, you go native, and then you're in trouble.
We've got a question as well from David McKinnon. Can you unmute yourself, David, and ask the question? There we go.
Sorry, it's Anne-Louise. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't work out how to raise my hand. What are the drawbacks to getting CQC registration? I'm just thinking in the organisation. So I work for actually a charity in horse racing. So the British Horse Racing Authority is the CMO, and he basically is doing most of the sort of CQC governance type stuff. But within our 3 centres, we've got team and multidisciplinary teams in each of the 3 centres with physiotherapists and now myself. And we've always had this question over CQC registration. And we've always shied away from it in that I don't perform diagnostics or interventions, but we're getting to the point that we probably ought to be able to do a bit more.
Thanks for the question. Again, I repeat, I think the advantage in CQC is actually it gives you a degree of protection in the standard setting of the hardware of the facility that you work out of. You end up with inane things in CQC like lockable doors, lockable cupboards, floors that you can clean, hot and cold water supplies, and a complaint system and a chaperoning system. And these all might seem unbelievably banal, but actually it elevates you off the working out of the men's changing room scenario, which is so important because it starts legitimately to give you a proper clinical environment. And second of all, I think there's just the professional pride issue. If we don't work out of decent facilities with sphygmanometers that are serviced each year, how do we do the basics of maintaining a good standard? So I think far from CQC being a pain in the neck, actually it's actually a great starting point for actually ensuring that you can do good practice.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. I think we'll need to move on because I'm sure all of you are looking at the clock and realizing that we still have 2 speakers to go. So I'm going to hand over to Ralph. But
yeah.
Thanks very much, Rod. That was great.
Yeah, Rod, that's been fantastic. You've raised lots of things to think about there for everybody. Great. So I'm going to move on to Natasha Jones, who's many of you, all of you, I'm sure know. She's the ex-president from the faculty. She's a consultant in the Nuffield Orthopaedic Centre in Oxford, and she's been really spearheading the moving medicine part of the faculty launching this and then successfully winning national prizes. And she's also gone on to been involved in and leading on the Active Hospital project, which was a really exciting chance to introduce physical activity and exercise medicine into the NHS, which is completely at the moment underutilized. And I think Natasha's really hopefully going to show us how we can start to build these services in the NHS and think about them and the lessons learned from our experience at the AUH. So Natasha.
Thanks, Ralph. I'll just try and share my screen. Right. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks all for joining, and I'm sorry to anybody who was hoping to catch Rod and has got me instead. We changed the order, not deliberately, but I'm sorry if it caught anybody out who wasn't interested in exercise medicine. But to me, exercise medicine is the reason I went into the NHS in sport and exercise medicine. And it's certainly, although it's probably only given me 10% of my income over the last 11 years, it's if that, it's certainly delivered 90% of the personal and professional satisfaction that I've got from my career. You guys have all grown up with moving medicine. It's always been a part of your sort of consultant life, I imagine, or it's always been there. When I started and when Rod and Mike started, exercise medicine was something the faculty talked with a sort of degree of wisdom, of sort of whimsicality about, knowing that we needed to do it, but not really knowing how. And the opportunities of the last 5 years that have been given to us by Sport England and others have, as Ralph said, really sort of catapulted this agenda right up to the top, which is absolutely where it needs to be, I think, for the NHS. So, you know, why bother with this? It's not going to make you a millionaire, and it's not as glamorous as being in elite sport. Part of that I've already spoken about. To me, it is what we can really give back to our patients, and I certainly think that, well, I've seen it at a personal level over and over again in Oxford, the difference that our services continue to make, even now. The other thing about exercise medicine is if you are in an NHS job, it will enable you to develop other services. So Mike will talk to you later about MSK medicine and the challenges with keeping services going and legitimising our position within those services. For us in Oxford, having the exercise medicine backup always behind us and the training that we undertake as part of that has always strengthened our position in the MSK environment. And we have repetitively fallen back on exercise medicine, and it's got us through many difficult directorate meetings. As I said earlier, you now as fellows finally have a foot in the door. You have a service behind you. You have people to look to who have already done this, and you can use that experience, and you can use the amazing resources that so many people have developed. And I'll show. We'll go through. We'll look at some of those in a minute. As I said earlier, this is a bit altruistic, but training is a really important part of your consultant career. It may not seem like that quite yet for some of you, but it is the thing that will drive you, and it's the most satisfying part of what you do, seeing other people come through, develop, and change the way they look at things as a result of the training you've offered them. So it's not just SEM trainees either. We offer training opportunities to other specialties, A&E, rehab services, cardiology trainees have come to us as well. So there's lots that you can do with that, and it's very satisfying. And then the research opportunities as exercise medicine offers. In Oxford, we've certainly capitalised on that, and moving medicine nationally is continuing to capitalise on that. So again, if you're interested in research, it's a really ripe area. There's so much to do, and there's so many opportunities being afforded by the fact that we're now delivering clinical services. So that translational research is really important. I'm just going to sort of spend 5 minutes going through the business planning section, particularly of the Active Hospital Toolkit, because I think this is what Ralph really wanted me to talk about. There is a huge library of information in this toolkit that Chris Spears put together, or led the putting together of this toolkit with many other people in Oxford and outside Oxford. The toolkit is going to continually be expanded and updated as a result of the learning from other active hospital sites which have now started, and it doesn't have to be a specific active hospital site either. So if you're interested in exercise medicine, if you've got pathways that are going on, if you've got learning that you feel should be shared, the Active Hospital Toolkit is the place for it. We have a peer review process now, and we can take your work and we can publish it through that medium, which is really good, and I think it is going to be very important in the future. Hang on, I'll just go back. So I'm just going to hopefully this will work. I'm just going to take you to the internet. Feel free to just open your own browsers and just go to Active Hospitals on the Moving Medicine website. So I'm not going to play the video because you've probably all seen it all. I would say to you, though, that if you're going to directorate meetings or trust meetings or even CCG meetings, playing the video really helps. Those little quirky touches which capture people's attention, it really help. And I don't think we've ever missed an opportunity to use this video, and it always puts a smile on people's faces. So please use it. Now, there's masses and masses of information. Many of you will have seen it already, but we'll just sort of go to the business case section of it just for the purposes of tonight, just so you can see what's there. Because planning a business case for exercise medicine isn't easy. You have to be opportunistic about this, but it really helps to have some of the sort of details in the background so that you can easily access and quickly access things and not have to do all the work yourself again. This work's already been done by many other people, so let's not reinvent the wheel. It's hard enough as it is. Just use this, and I think you'll find it quite useful. So first of all, you know, when you're developing any business case, you've got to think about the national context. We've been through the long-term plan in great detail. We've been through every part of it that could possibly be relevant to active hospitals, and we have given you information to help you sort of use that part of the long-term plan, depending on what service you're sort of bidding for or suggesting. So you don't need to read the whole long-term plan, which is a huge document. You can just go to this and it should tell you, you know, the headlines of what you need to know. And then, of course, you can go to the long-term plan if you want some more detail. Funding opportunities are really difficult. When I first started as a consultant 11 years ago, we managed to get a service commissioned through a CCG funding opportunity, and then we partnered with a local charity, and it was all very opportunistic. I would say to you that exercise medicine is still very opportunistic, but keep an eye on what your CCG are publishing, particularly as the CCGs are, we think, probably going to be sort of restructured again, and it's going to be much more about integrated care. Exercise medicine fits brilliantly into integrated care systems. So just keep looking at what people are commissioning, and you'd be amazed how easy it is to just piggyback onto the back of some of this stuff. So, for example, the long COVID clinics, these are going to be huge. The role of exercise medicine is really important in those. Piggyback on that. Diabetic services, cancer services, children's services. Keep an eye on things, and you'd be amazed what you can get into. And it's sometimes getting your foot on the door, which is the best way, really, rather than expecting to be delivered a huge great service on your doorstep, which frankly, if you're just starting out in the NHS, you're not going to be able to handle anyway. So it's much better to just feel your way through smaller initiatives. Ralph has done a huge amount of work in maternity, for example. You might not think, well, maternity is an obvious place to work in this area, but it's been a real opportunity for him, and it will continue to be. So, you know, keep your eye out and keep talking to your colleagues. Business planning, again, there's lots of information on the website here about it. There is a business planning template, which is the one we use in Oxford, and the questions in it will be used across the NHS because these are fairly generic. They ask for these questions, which are here: summary of proposal, what's the issue, da, da, da. And we've prepared answers for you to use, and then you can make them more bespoke. But again, we've just made it easier for you to use that. Local strategy is really important. So, you know, what is your trust trying to do? What's important to your trust? So for us in Oxford, people getting care closer to home is really important. Looking after our colleagues is really important. These are things which are headlines in the trust strategy. So have a look at your trust strategy, see how you can tie into it. Again, we've given you some sort of examples. There's a PDF here, for example, of our trust strategy document, which I'll just get up there for you. This was our recent trust strategy, and I've just shown you how we've sort of piggybacked our service into our trust strategy, and then you get that to whoever is managing your trust strategy, and just try and influence at every point you can. These things are a lot of work, but they're a lot less work because we've done so much of it already for you. And then the last bit here is the prevention paper, which is Matt Hancock's paper, and it just, you know, it's poetry really for exercise medicine. So again, we've been through it all in great detail, and we've sort of worked out how you can use that paper to strengthen your business cases. So look, that's all there. The governance section of this is again hugely important. Rod talked about governance, and when I've looked at exercise medicine services in the past, and even ones that still exist now, governance is often something which is neglected because these are often, or in the past often, haven't been consultant led, and I think that's something which we all need to consider. So make sure that you build in every one of those pillars of clinical governance that you all know so well. Make sure that you involve patients. Make sure you audit. Make sure you can show your quality improvement work. Make sure you're linking to research and to you know, evidence. So, you know, we've added a huge amount of detail. Ralph, in fact, wrote this governance framework, and we've sort of linked it to everything that we've done in the Active Hospital Toolkit. And the new pathways, which are currently being peer reviewed, all will have a sort of supporting governance structure to them. So have a little look. So sort of just, I hope you guys find that helpful. We put it there for you. When we designed this toolkit, it was specifically for new consultants in SEM that we were thinking, you know, other people can use it, physios can use it, you know, others can use it as well. But it was you that we were thinking of when we put it together. So I do hope that people find it useful and contribute to its ongoing development. The core principles of everything you need to think of when you're putting together any new service, and Mike will say the same about MSK services, you've got to think, is this feasible? Is this transferable to other areas, other sites? Is this sustainable? And is it scalable? And this is particularly important for exercise medicine interventions because, of course, exercise medicine applies to pretty much every one of the patients that we treat. So, you know, you do have to think at scale. You can't, you know, when I first started off as a consultant, people were saying, well, what we should be doing is have a exercise medicine clinic, and people should come and we should prescribe exercise to them. But you know, that's just never going to work, because there's too many people and there's not enough of us, and there never will be. So we need to think about interventions that train others, that you can scale up easily across the NHS. And although it might be led by a consultant, it absolutely won't be delivered by a consultant, because frankly, people can't afford you. So I'm nearly finished now, but a few little lessons learned really. First of all, talk to others. Talk to people across the trust that are already doing these things, and you will find them. Just go and listen to them. Find out how long they've been working in those services. Just see what's going on, because there's so much to be learned that way. And you will be much more acceptable to others if they think that you've heard what they've had to say, rather than coming in all new and enthusiastic, but actually not knowing anything. And then be opportunistic, decide who your friends are. So if there's a really keen neurologist who wants to do some work with Parkinson's disease, then do it. Even if you're not that interested in Parkinson's disease, just find out who those people are and pick the low hanging fruit, because it really works. To do that, it's much, much easier than trying to convince somebody who's coming to this completely green. As I said earlier, take those opportunities when they arise. For me, you know, it was that CCG bid for our little local service which really got me started. So just keep an eye out, and when you see things, use it and take those opportunities. If you want advice on how best to do it, we're more than happy to do that, and the team at Moving Medicine will offer you a lot of support. And again, I think Mike will talk about this, you know, keep adapting as things change. You know, I've showed you our trust strategy in 2025, that will change. So in, you know, 4 short years, we'll have a new one. So you've just got to be prepared to keep looking and keep adapting. But that really goes across medicine. This isn't just about exercise medicine. Make sure you've got a group of people around you, even if they're not SEM consultants, who support you. So find out who so the people you work with, if they're orthopods, if they're rheumatologists, whoever they are, just get some people around you to support you, and work out who those people are, because you will need it at times. And use training, even if your trust isn't a training trust, or even if you don't have registrars yourself, use training in others. So use other foundation doctors, for example. There are a lot of people out there who really believe that exercise medicine is a way forward for the NHS. To me, I think the word belief is wrong, because it sounds a bit evangelical. It's not about belief, it's a reality. But those people who know it's a reality are the people to pick up and support, and they will give you so much back, because they'll do a load of work for you. They'll do your audits for you. They'll help you take the service forward. So use those opportunities, because you can't do it all on your own. And similarly with research, we've had good success in Oxford over that. One of our previous registrars is now I think the first or second ever exercise medicine SEM consultant in Nottingham. So we have done that, and we continue to do that. And Moving Medicine will support you as best we can to write up papers and to do your abstracts and to plan your research studies if that's what you want. And lastly, if you don't want to do this locally, if you want to do this nationally, then there are masses of opportunities within Moving Medicine, and I'd just encourage you to give us a ring or give us an email. You don't have to commit hours and hours and hours to it. You could just do one little discrete thing, but everything that you do eventually will bear benefit, will be important. So please don't be shy in coming forward. We're here to support you. And for me, this is all about you guys now. I'm not going to be around for an awful much longer before I retire. So for me, this is all about supporting you guys to take the mantle on. So that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Natasha. That was actually really highlighting the huge opportunity that we have to really work across a number of specialties, and the toolkit is fantastic, and the fact that it really starts to give us an idea of where to start to go and start this journey, which is challenging. You know, I think the way that the toolkit aligns up with the long-term plan and then also looking at your local trust needs is really important, and it covers so many aspects. I think from my experience, you know, physical activity and exercise medicine really well positively received across lots of teams. Even when we were working in the COVID pandemic, when we were recruited to work in the author Jerry's team, they were so positive about us working with them across that. So I think the opportunities are there. I suppose my question would be, everyone's often very positive about this, but how do we get them to commit to really helping to push this forward and possibly funding it?
Well, as I said, you've got to look out for commissioning opportunities, and they do come up. If you want funding, you've got to find it. It's often CCG funding rather than trust funding, unless you can align it specifically with the trust priority, which might be about supporting staff, or it might be about a specific patient pathway, in which case you may get consultant time put to it. You'll never get a huge amount of money, but they might say, okay, we'll give you 3 sessions and you know, and you can use the trainees and so on. So that's the sort of opportunity you'll get within the trust. But if you want funding, it often comes from CCGs or in the future integrated care systems.
Brilliant. I think it's really exciting. Thank you. Has anyone got any questions, any hands raised? I know we're a bit behind the schedule, so thank you very much, Natasha. We'll move on to the final talk, and Mike, I'll let Alethea introduce Mike.
Yep, thank you very much, Natasha. And our next speaker this evening is Dr. Mike Rossiter, and it's fantastic to have this wealth and breadth of knowledge across our speakers tonight. So do feel free to ask questions of them. Mike is a consultant in sport and exercise medicine, and was actually one of the founding fellows of the Faculty of Sport and Exercise Medicine back in 2006. He now sits as the vice president of the faculty. And tonight we've got him talking around MSK clinics and setting up musculoskeletal services, of which he has a huge array of experience at his base within the Hampshire hospitals and within the CCG there. So I'd like to welcome Mike to present to us this evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alethea. I just need to share my screen. Everyone got that? I'll take that as a yes.
Yep, we can see that. Yep, that's great. Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Well, thanks very much. And so far, there are still 17 participants. I'll be watching how many drop off in the next 10 to 15 minutes. And thanks very much for asking me. I'm just going to sort of run through a very quick thing about commissioning an MSK service. I say in the NHS, but it's essentially, if you're going to commission it anywhere, the same principles apply. And I think I'm probably similar to a lot of people. You set up a service, you think it's brilliant, it's widely well received, and then it's pulled from under your feet again. So that is similar to many of my colleagues. So as Natasha was saying earlier, it is about persistence and not giving up first time, because it will have to change over and over again. As many people know in the NHS only thinks about a year in advance, 3 if you're lucky. And the people that you've forged good relationships with within CCGs and trusts, the management will often move on very quickly and you have to start again. Interestingly, Anna Louise is on this call, and Anna Louise and I have a meeting with our directorate manager tomorrow to actually explain what we do, not only from an MSK point of view, but actually who on earth are we? So it just goes to show that you are constantly having to remind people who you are and what you do. So if you want a really good look through it, the MSK commissioning guidance is on the faculty website. That's written as essentially a template that you can adapt if you are trying to commission an MSK service. Because about 2 or 3 years ago, NHS England said that there was a directive for getting an effective MSK triage service across all regions. Now, it's left it fairly open as to what that means. So it could literally be a triaging service. It could be a all singing and dancing treatment and investigation centre. Now, I fully accept that this is somewhat of a personal view, but as Alethea says, I've been sort of doing this quite a long time now. So based on sort of trial and error, this is what I think will get you off to establishing a good MSK service. It's very fair to say that it's much easier if you're trying to commission a service in an area where a service already exists. You're trying to take it over because there is an understanding of the basics of what MSK is. If you're trying to establish it green, then you've got a much harder task, as Natasha was saying, because you've got to actually explain to people what on earth sport and exercise medicine is and MSK medicine, because it's not as easy as going in as a rheumatologist or an orthopedic surgeon, because everyone realizes and understands what they are. But I think if you want to commission a good service, it needs to be fully integrated between primary and secondary care. So some people will call it a tier 2 service. I don't think it matters. The boundaries are blurring much more now between primary and secondary care, but you are a very important interface between the two. And even better if you can get it integrated with the services that you're going to work with, so physiotherapy, podiatry, rheumatology, and it should be led by a sport and exercise medicine physician. Now, clearly I'm biased, but I'll try and justify that. Ideally, it needs to be in the same setting. So whether you have it in primary or secondary care doesn't really matter. You could have it in the church hall as far as I'm concerned. But if you want a service to run properly, it needs to be a seamless service. So people aren't having to wait to go and see one person when you've seen them and you say you need to go and see a physiotherapist or an orthopedic surgeon. It needs to be as seamless as possible. And ideally, you get them to see them on the same day. So get it right first time, get them seen by the right person in the right place. Now, although you could have it in the church hall, the reality is that if you want a fully integrated service, the reality is that most people, most of the time, you're in a hospital setting. That's where your pathology is. It's where your radiology is, radiology department is, and it's where your specialists are. So although it can be in the community, I think it's probably better run in a hospital, but there are pros and cons to that. What most commissioners are asking for is that it needs to be front door facing. So as we know, GPs haven't got the time or the expertise to see people with MSK problems. So most MSK services now are asking for FCPs, first contact practitioners. Now that can be any practitioner. It could be a chiropractor, it could be an advanced physio, it could be an OT. The reality is that most are physios, but you could also have a GPSI who hopefully with the launch of our new faculty diploma will hold the MSK diploma. And certainly at Basingstoke, we have a GP link system where we're currently training 2 GPs who are fully qualified GPs to get MSK knowledge that's funded via the CCG, and then they can go out and be the sort of lead within their hub in a primary care network. And we hope that we'd be able to link that into secondary care, so there's a bit more of a seamless service. But the MSK hub needs to be multidisciplinary. It needs to have a mixture of specialities, so sport and exercise medicine, GPSIs, as I said, or whatever they're called now, advanced care, physio, podiatrists. Obviously, if you can ultrasound on site, great. But I suspect I may be a bit old school, but I don't think that it's an absolute mandatory that you need to be able to ultrasound as a sports medic. It helps. Access to EMGs, and then novel treatments, as Rod was saying, shockwave therapy, PRP, or whatever, so long as it is audited and it's adjusted appropriately. Then you need to have a good community physiotherapy and podiatry setup, and probably most importantly, you've got to have a smooth link to secondary care, and people you're most likely to refer to are orthopedics, rheumatology, and pain, and so you need to have good relationships with them. And probably a radiologist as well. The other thing that commissioners now are asking for are telephone clinics. Actually, this slide was written before COVID, and telephone clinics a year ago were a bit sort of, well, how do we do that? But it's quite common now, and more people are getting used to telephone clinics. And patient education, so it's no longer good enough to hand out a leaflet. You've got to be able to have some sort of digital platform. So, you know, Moving Medicine is a great example of online education. There are beginning to have better and better MSK platforms which show exercises or rehab stuff, but they tend to be developed by the private companies. And again, if you can have a digital integration across primary and secondary care, then all the better. So who's going to fund this? Well, it might be funded by the CCGs, it might be funded directly from primary care networks, it might be funded through secondary care. It's really important that you establish who is actually holding the purse strings, and you try and, ideally, you want to set it up forever and a day. But the reality, as I say, is that most will set it up for between 1 and 3 years. And I think that's a big mistake. It probably takes at least 3 years to get the clinics up and running and refined. So you've got to convince people that when you're setting these services up, it needs time to develop, especially if you've never had a service in that area before. Rome was not built in a day. It takes time to establish relationships, get to know what's right and wrong for your area. But a lot of people want results, and quite rightly in certain cases, results now, and they're not prepared to wait and see. So I guess this is the most important slide for this evening, is you've got to remember that we as SEM consultants and doctors are an expensive commodity. And so most CCGs, when they set up a service, will not want doctors within that service, and even less so consultants, because they're expensive. Of course, there's a lack of understanding of what exactly we do, and you've got to go out and preach the word. But it's more that you are an expensive commodity. And so what you have to do is justify why you are there, what you can do, and ultimately you will save money, not cost money. And again, I'm preaching to the converted, but a good SEM MSK consultant is worth their weight in gold. They've got a huge breadth of knowledge, a holistic view, they've got a skill set that other specialities do not have. And so if they're used properly, you will find that, or you should find, is your number of referrals onwards, your number of investigations onwards is less, and you quickly save money. Now, the only way to prove that is to audit your work. And certainly when I originally set up the service in Hampshire, I persuaded the trust to fund me to do a pilot for a year to prove that it was a service worth doing. Now, if you can do that, fantastic. If you can nick somebody else's work that's already done it and show it, then fair enough. Then you've got to decide whether you work purely with the NHS or you work integrated with private companies. And I won't name private company names, but there are several big name private companies who will offer an MSK service. Unfortunately, a lot of them don't employ sports medicine consultants, which I think is a mistake. But remember, when you're competing, and I've got first-hand knowledge of this from last year, when you're competing against private companies as an NHS body, you're competing against companies that will invest an awful lot of money into writing a really good bid. So they'll have professional bid writers who'll make it look good. They'll have lots of flashy statistics and pictures, but actually, if you pick through it, what they say may not be is what they deliver, and so you're competing against that. So I think, as Natasha says, what you've got to do is you've got to identify exactly what the CCG and the finance within that you're there to work with. A lot of them have really no idea how much a good service costs. Again, if you can use other people's statistics that have set up services, then you should share those, because they'll want to know what other people do. Go and visit, or get the commissioners to go and visit services that already run and see what they do. As I've said before, you've got to show that SEM doctors reduce costs. I think it's really important to collaborate with the physios, the HSP, because FCPs, again, are good. Good FCPs are really good, but they've got to be integrated within your service. You've got to find where you locate properly. And I think the MSK diploma gives some gravitas to GPs who are wanting to work within an MSK service and have some sort of baseline, because having a degree or a diploma in sports medicine is not the same as having a degree and knowledge of musculoskeletal. They are similar but distinctly different. So that's a whiz through. I can see it's now nearly 10 to 8, so I hope that's not too quick, but I will take any questions. I don't know how do I stop screen sharing, actually, whether somebody else does that for me. There we go, stop share. There we are.
So thank you very much, Mike. That was great, and probably opened up a can of worms, I'm sure, and lots of thought processes going on. Dane's just got a question that he's put on here, which says, is there any evidence data to suggest we could save more money, or an outcome that shows we are better in comparison to services run by physios / AHPs?
Yeah, Dane, that is the $1 million question, isn't it? That's what everyone wants to know. And I would suggest that the only way you can do that is to, through the faculty, if you want, ask the question for people like myself, for instance, who've been there, done it, and got the statistics, to go and share the statistics. They are out there. I have to say some are more accurate and more honest than others. But it's very difficult to do. So you've got to do it from not only a financial saving, which is quite hard to do when when people don't know which tariffs to charge, and how you can break down your own time, but also on the actual pathway of the patient pathway as well. So it is difficult to do, but ask around. People do have those stats.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions that they'd like to ask Mike?
I was going to ask a quick question, Nita,
Yep.
just to Mike, about the, you mentioned about the different settings, and obviously it's quite attractive to people maybe to work in GP surgeries, and you know, I'm quite attracted by the way the hospital setting seems the right way with more teams around you. I just wanted to get your further thoughts on that, really.
Yeah, you know, I think the as I say, the setting, actually where you have it doesn't bother me particularly. You know, you're talking about, is it different in an urban environment to a rural environment? I think the most important thing is that you have as many people in that pathway in the same area as possible working at the same time, so that the patient essentially rotates around the specialist, ideally on the same day. Now, some general practices, some bigger hubs now do have radiology on site. They do have visiting consultants. They have got the space, but my experience is that's a rarity. And hospitals, they are just the location. And what the criticism from the CCGs is always we want to keep people out of hospital. We don't want people to come into hospital. Well, this is not the same as bringing people into hospital as an inpatient or as a constantly going through outpatients. It's a multidisciplinary setting, and it's just that hospitals simplistically are bigger spaces with the room, and they've got the setup to do it. But if there's somewhere in the community that does that, and that has to include radiology as well, then fine. That doesn't, you know, absolutely fine. Doing a cottage hospital if you've got one. It doesn't matter. And I think it's slightly easier now with things like Zoom and Teams and things like that, that you might be able to do it better because you're able to contact people. So, you know, I may be a little bit out of touch now. The fact that we've got more electronic might make life easier as to where you hold it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I don't think there's any more questions from what I can see there, Ralph. And I think Natasha and obviously Rod have had to go. So I don't know if you want to wind up the session.
Yeah, brilliant, guys. This is fantastic to have the first education session with the webinar. And we're hoping to have more of this in the future. I put the feedback link to fill out on the chat, and we'll send it around in an email as well. We'd be really grateful for everyone's feedback on this session and how we can develop things further. Like I said, the next session is going to be on the 2nd of March at 6:30 again, looking at private practice and appraisal. And we really look forward to you joining us. I'm just really grateful for everyone who's put all the hard work into arranging this tonight, and our excellent speakers. Have a good evening, and catch up with you soon, and have a Merry Christmas if I don't see you before.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Thanks.